Ma'am, I don't know how you got out here, but this is an active flight line, not a tourist stop. You've got 10 seconds to walk yourself back to that gate before I have somebody walk you. Let's go. Staff Sergeant Travis Kern said it loud enough for the 3 Marines behind him, loud enough to carry down the row of parked Hornets where the sodium lights were just coming up amber against a sky going from copper to ash. The woman under the wing did not turn around. She stood beneath the left intake of an FA-18D, side number 704, one bare hand laid flat on the lip of the intake, the way a person touches the shoulder of something they know. Her flight suit was worn soft at the knees and elbows. No rank on the collar. No name tape on the chest. The fabric had the gray-green of 1,000 wash cycles and 1,000 cockpits. The air smelled of cooling tarmac and JP-8 and the sea 2 miles west. 1,300 feet of flight line stretched behind her in a line of dark airframes, and she had walked it alone in the dusk, like a woman counting headstones. You hear me? Kern took 2 steps closer. I said move. She moved her fingers, not her feet. They traced the inner curve of the intake lip, reading it, feeling for the small-lipped nick that a stone throws into metal at 400 knots. There was none. The jet was clean. Her face, in the amber light, gave away nothing at all. She did not look at him. She looked at the airplane. Behind Kern, Lance Corporal Sam Devlin, 19 years old, 4 months on the line, had started forward with a chalk in his hand to help the woman find the exit, and had frozen the instant Kern's voice cracked. Now he stood with the chalk against his thigh, and his eyes moving between the 2 of them. Staff Sergeant, Devlin started. Did I talk to you? Kern didn't turn. He was enjoying the audience. Men like Kern always knew exactly how many people were watching. Ma'am, 10 seconds. I won't say it twice. This is my flight line, and you are a problem I do not have. The woman straightened, unhurried. She took her hand off the metal and let it hang, and for half a second, the cold of the intake stayed in her fingers like a held note. Understood, she said. 1 word. Flat. No heat in it, no apology either. She turned and walked, and the thing the Marines would remember later, the thing none of them could name in the moment, was the way she walked. Heel set exactly to the painted yellow line, toe rolling off it, the line eaten under her boots like she'd painted it herself. Nobody walks a flight line like that by accident. As she passed the nose of 704, her eyes flicked once to the Modex stenciled on the gear door. 704. She filed it the way other people file a face. Kern watched her go and grinned at his Marines. Contractors, he said, like the word explained everything. They send us a clipboard with legs and expect us to salute it. One of the juniors laughed because that was the price of standing in Kern's circle. Devlin didn't. The woman reached the edge of the line, stepped off the concrete onto the dark apron, and was gone into the space between 2 hangars. Kern turned back to his jets, his kingdom, his night. He had already forgotten her face. He would spend the rest of his life remembering it. Out past the fence, the woman stopped once in the dark and looked back at the long row of aircraft she was not allowed to stand near. Her hand still carried the temperature of the intake she would fly in 36 hours. She flexed the fingers slowly, once, and let it go. Then she walked toward the lights of the visiting officers' quarters, and the flight line settled back into its noise behind her. The whine of a power cart, the clank of a tow bar, Kern's voice riding over all of it, telling someone they'd done something wrong. She did not need a flight line badge to know what she'd seen in 3 minutes on that ramp. She'd seen a line crew that moved when the staff sergeant looked and slacked when he didn't. She'd seen a 19-year-old freeze with a chalk in his hand. She'd seen a man who ran his Marines on fear and called it standards. She'd seen a lot of flight lines. She knew the difference between a tight one and a frightened one. A tight crew was quiet because it was concentrating. A frightened crew was quiet because it was waiting to see whose turn it was. This one was the second kind, and the difference mattered, because frightened crews cut corners they think no one will see, and corners cut on a flight line come back at 300 knots. She had flown 30 years' worth of airplanes that other people had signed off as safe. She had learned to read the signature and the hand behind it, and she had learned, the hard way, on a different night a long time ago, that the most dangerous man on any flight line is rarely the loud one. It's the one who has decided that the truth is whatever keeps his numbers green. 704 sat clean and dark under the amber lights, waiting for a sunrise it didn't know about yet. Somewhere, a phone would ring in the morning. Somewhere, a name she had carried for 16 years was printed on a folded program on a desk in her quarters. But that was tomorrow's weather. Tonight, she walked the painted line out into the dark, exactly, heel to toe, and let Staff Sergeant Travis Kern believe he had won something. By morning she was back. They badged her through as a visiting evaluator, civilian-looking, no rank anybody could see, escorted by a bored corporal who didn't know what she was looking at either. The cover held the way it always held. People saw the soft flight suit and the quiet, and decided she was nobody. And she let them, because being nobody is the best seat in any room. Hangar Bay 3 smelled of hydraulic fluid and coffee and the particular ozone of a jet being powered up indoors. A Hornet sat on jacks, with its panels open like a patient on a table. Master Sergeant Gideon Pope stood at the maintenance control counter with a torque wrench in his hand and 28 years in his shoulders, and he watched the evaluator come through the door, and the first thing he noticed was that she scanned the bay before she took a step into it. She didn't look around the way a visitor looks around. She looked the way a person looks who has learned that doorways are where things go wrong. A fast read of the exits, the high catwalk, the open panels, the men, the tools, the closest thing to a weapon and the closest thing to a wall. A half second. Then stillness. Then she walked in like she owned the lease. Pope had seen that scan exactly twice before in his life. Both times the person doing it had been worth a great deal more than they looked. Out on the line, a jet was turning, run up for a functional check. The nozzle glows soft in the morning haze. The evaluator was 30 feet from it, walking when she stopped mid-stride. She went utterly still, head tilted half a degree, listening. "Tell him to pull it back," she said to the nearest Marine, not loud. "Bleed air leak, left side. There's an 800 cycle whine under the fan. You'll have a duct over temp before he's at military power." The Marine, a corporal who'd never seen her before, looked at her like she'd spoken in tongues. "Ma'am, the gauges are green. I know. They will not be green in about 2 seconds." 2 seconds later, the duct over temp light blinked amber in the cockpit, and the pilot snapped the throttle back to idle, and the corporal's mouth came open, and across the bay, Gideon Pope set down his torque wrench very gently, like a man who didn't want to make a sound. She hadn't read a gauge. She'd read the engine. By ear. The way you only can if you've spent 10,000 hours with that exact sound wrapped around your skull at altitude. The corporal kept staring. "How did you—" "It changes pitch before it changes temperature," she said. "The bleed air duct starts to sing about 1.5 seconds before the sensor agrees with it. Older jets do it more than the books admit." She said it the way you'd tell someone the time. Then she added, quieter, almost to the airplane, and not to him. "Tell your crew chief to look at the left side check valve, not the regulator. He'll want to chase the regulator. It's the valve." It was the valve. They found it an hour later, after the crew chief chased the regulator first. She walked on. As she passed the jet on jacks, her palm came out and ran along a panel seam without her looking at it. A flat, unconscious sweep, checking the fasteners were flush. The muscle memory of a person who has walked around an airplane more times than they have walked around their own house. She didn't even know she was doing it. Pope knew. Pope had spent half his life watching pilots' hands. Hands like that don't come off a clipboard. Kern arrived 10 minutes later and heard from the corporal that the contractor lady had called the bleed air leak before the gauges, and the information sat wrong in him. A normal man would have been grateful. Kern heard only that a civilian had been right about his jets in front of his Marines, and the wrongness of it curdled into something he would feed for the next 2 days. "She's not authorized to call faults on my line," he told the corporal. "She's not authorized to do anything but stand where I tell her to stand." Pope, at the counter, said nothing. He turned the torque wrench over once in his hand and watched the door she'd gone through. By that afternoon, Kern had a name for her. He gave it to the crew in the line shack, the way men like him always issue the joke that becomes the policy. "Her name's Clipboard," he said, leaning back, boots up. "She doesn't touch my jets. She doesn't talk to my Marines. She wants a record. She can stand in line behind every actual Marine on this flight line. Somebody finds her wandering, you walk her to the fence." It got the laugh he wanted. Most of them. Devlin studied the toes of his boots, so they ran the small cruelties. They lost the aircraft records she'd asked for. They sent her to the wrong hangar and let her stand at a locked door in the sun for 40 minutes. And when she came back, they sent her to a different wrong hangar. She didn't complain. She waited. She checked her watch, turned inward on her wrist, the face against her pulse, the way people wear it when they don't want a glint giving away their position. And she noted the time, and she wrote something in a small green notebook, and she waited some more. There is a particular cruelty in making a patient person wait. It works on people who have somewhere to be. It does nothing at all to people who have spent nights in worse places than a locked hangar door, who have learned that waiting is just another posture, that you can stand for hours with your weight balanced and your breathing slow and your eyes reading everything and give the appearance of nothing. Kern's crew thought they were wearing her down. They were giving her 3 days to map every weak seam in his operation, and she was a person who mapped seams for a living. By the second afternoon, she could have drawn the line's duty roster from memory. She knew which Marines moved only when Kern watched, and which ones did the work, whether he watched or not. She knew Devlin was the youngest, and the most afraid, and the most decent, which is a hard combination to be. And she knew there were 2 others like him, being ground down quietly in the hours after midnight. She found Devlin at a jet near the end of the day, sweating over a panel, a fastener cross-threaded and going nowhere, and Kern 50 feet off and getting closer. "Quarter turn back first," she said. "Quiet, not stopping, barely slowing. Let it find the thread. Then seat it. You knew that. Don't let him make you forget what you know." Devlin's hands found the motion. The fastener seated. He breathed. Kern saw the tail end of it, saw the woman near his Marine, near his jet, and crossed the distance fast. Did she touch that aircraft? Devlin, did you let the tourist touch my aircraft? No, Staff Sergeant. She didn't touch anything. She talked to you. That's touching it. Kern got close to the kid's face, close enough that Devlin could smell the coffee on him. "You're on my line. You talk to me. Not to clipboards. You read." "Aye, Staff Sergeant." The woman had already stepped away. She didn't watch the dressing down. She opened the green notebook and wrote 1 line, a date, and closed it. If you've ever watched someone with real authority get treated like they were nothing, by someone who'd never earn a tenth of what they'd earned, and watched them take it without a word, then you already understand this channel. Subscribe to Honor Tales. Stay to the end of this one. The end is the whole reason it exists. That green notebook closed on 3 lines and a date. It wasn't an audit. It was a flight log. But nobody on that line had earned the right to know that yet. The next morning, Kearns stopped being petty and started being dangerous. He filed a report. Unauthorized civilian on the flight line. Failure to comply with a lawful order to depart a controlled area. He filed it under the name on her visitor badge, the cover name, the nobody name. And he attached the time and the location and his own statement, crisp and false in the parts that mattered, and he got her flight line access flagged in the system before lunch. By 1300, her badge was pulled. A security NCO did it, embarrassed, following the paperwork up the chain because the paperwork existed, and the paperwork said she was a problem. Kern found her at the edge of the line to enjoy it. "Funny how it works," he said, hands loose, smiling. He talked the way he always talked, in paragraphs, circling, savoring. "You come out here, you call faults on jets that aren't yours. You put your hands all over my Marine's business, and now the system says you're trespassing. You're a liability I don't have time for, ma'am. You should have walked to the fence the first night. I told you to. I told you nicely." The woman answered in numbers. "You cited the wrong instruction," she said. "Your report references the access control reg that ends in -3. Flight line access for rated aircrew falls under -1 alpha, paragraph 4. The badge series you flagged is a visitor escort series. It was never an access credential. So revoking it as one creates a finding against you, not me. You'll want to fix that before someone who reads regulations reads yours." Flat. Exact. No anger anywhere in it. She recited the regulation the way other people recite their own phone number. Kern heard arrogance. He did not hear the warning under it, which was the warning a person gives once, as a courtesy, before they stop giving warnings. "Cute," he said. "You memorize the rulebook in your spare time? That what contractors do?" He shook his head, grinning, playing to the 2 Marines who drifted over to watch. "Lawyer up all you want. You're off my line. Badge says so. My report says so. And out here, my report is the weather." "Your report has your name on it," she said. "That's the part you should think about. Not mine. Yours." He didn't think about it. That was the whole tragedy of Travis Kern in one sentence. At every moment when a smarter or a humbler man would have stopped and felt the floor shift under him, Kern stepped down harder. Because stepping down harder was the only move he had ever been rewarded for. She looked past him, down the row, and read the morning the way she'd read the engine. The fuel truck working its way up the line in the order it always worked. 704 being towed forward, pre-flighted, panels checked, the lead jet. A 2-ship, and then a 4-ship building for something at dawn the next day. She knew the launch sequence cold, without anyone telling her a thing, because the choreography of a flight line getting ready to fly is the same in every language, and she had spoken it her whole adult life. "Your lead aircraft is 704, she said, almost to herself. "Good. That's the right one." "What?" "Nothing, Staff Sergeant." She turned and walked off the line, off the painted concrete, badgeless now, and stood at the fence like a civilian, watching his jets through the chain link. Inside maintenance control, Master Sergeant Gideon Pope pulled up the new flag in the system and read the report and read the name and went very, very still. He knew that visitor name was a cover. He'd known it since the bleed air leak. He'd spent a night not sleeping, turning it over, telling himself he was an old man seeing legends in a coffee cup. But the name on Kern's report was a costume, and Pope had spent 28 years learning to see the person inside the costume, and he had finally let himself say the real name in his own head. He picked up the phone. He dialed a number he had no business having, a number at the wing, and he said 6 quiet words to whoever answered, and he hung up. He stood in the empty maintenance control room and looked out the window at the lead jet, 704, sitting clean on the ramp in the noon sun. "Oh, Travis," he said softly, "you have no idea what you just did." That night, Pope went looking for her and found her in a dark corner of Hangar Bay 3, sitting on a toolbox with her back to a wall. Back to the wall, he noticed, always the wall. And he brought 2 cups of coffee and handed her one without a word. She took it. Her hands wrapped the cup the way cold hands do. He watched her hands. Everybody who knew anything watched her hands. "You don't have to tell me anything, ma'am," Pope said. He sat on a crate a respectful distance off. "I'm not going to say a name out loud in my own hangar, but if you're who I think you are, you should let me handle this one. Walk away. Go back to your quarters. Stay there. Let me make some calls. And let this fix itself in the morning without you in the middle of it." She drank the coffee. "What do you think happens in the morning?" "I think a lot of people find out they've been very stupid." He turned the cup in his hands. "I'd rather you didn't get scuffed up before they do." "I appreciate it." She almost smiled. "I'm not going anywhere until Thursday morning. I came a long way to fly Thursday. I'm flying Thursday." Pope nodded slowly, like a man who'd expected exactly that answer and was sorry to be right. "Then I've got work to do tonight," he said, and he stood, and he did it. Because while Kern had been building a case against a colonel, Pope had started building a case against Kern. And the deeper he dug into the line chief's perfect numbers, the worse it got. The night turnaround inspections. Signed, initialed, logged green. Beautiful paperwork. Except Pope walked 3 of them backward against the duty roster and the camera logs and found that the inspections Kern had signed had never been walked. The jets had been turned and put back on the schedule, with FOD checks faked and fluid samples logged that nobody had pulled. The numbers were green because Kern had decided they would be green, and a green line got you noticed, and getting noticed got you promoted. It wasn't laziness. Laziness Pope could have lived with. This was a man gambling other people's lives, the pilots who flew those jets, the crews who turned them, to keep his statistics clean. Pope had buried friends who died from less than this. A missed FOD walk was how a turbine ate a bolt at 30,000 feet. A faked fluid sample was how a hydraulic system failed on short final with the gear coming down. The line chief's perfect green numbers were a lie told in a language that killed people, and the people it would kill were the ones who trusted the signature at the bottom of the form. Pilots like the woman sitting on a toolbox in his hangar with her back to the wall, who walked her own jet in the dark because some part of her had always known not to trust a signature she hadn't watched a man earn. He printed it all, quietly. He made copies, and he made copies of the copies, and he locked one set in a place that had nothing to do with the squadron, because Pope had been a Marine long enough to know that the truth needs more than one home before a powerful man decides he doesn't like it. And under that, the other thing. Pope pulled the thread and it kept coming. Late-night remedial training that wasn't training. Juniors made to stand on the line past midnight for invented infractions. Devlin and 2 others. A pressured 19-year-old made to initial a log he hadn't completed because Kern told him to, and Kern was the whole world when you were 4 months on the line. Pope's jaw set harder with every page. Out on the ramp, in the dark, he watched the woman do something that finished it for him. Badgeless, not allowed within 50 feet of the aircraft, she walked the length of the line anyway in the shadows and ran an unofficial walk-around on 704, not touching, just looking. Her eyes and her tilted head doing the work her hands weren't allowed to do. Pitot covers, intake, the control surfaces, the slats, the flaps, the small telltale things a pilot checks because her life is the thing being checked. She did it in the dark, from 10 feet back, For a jet she was forbidden to approach, because she was going to fly it at sunrise, and she trusted nothing she hadn't seen with her own eyes. That was when Gideon Pope stopped doubting and started being afraid for everyone who'd called her clipboard. Here's what the night crew didn't know, standing out there keeping a woman away from an airplane. They didn't know whose airplane it had always been. They didn't know that the quietest person on that flight line was the most dangerous one, and that the morning was coming when they'd all find out at once. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay, because that morning is close now. Pope stood in the dark a long time after she'd gone in, watching the place where her hands had moved over a jet she wasn't allowed to touch, and he understood, finally and completely, that the only danger on his flight line had never been the woman. In the visiting officer's quarters that night, one light burned. She sat at the small desk with a folded program in front of her and a single worn flight glove laid beside it. And for the first time in 3 days, she let herself be the person she actually was. The program was for the morning. A name was printed inside it: Captain Dominic Sayers. And below the name, the thing the program didn't say but everyone in the formation would know: call sign Ripsaw, the man who had flown behind her on the worst and best night of her life and had not flown home. She let herself go back, just this once. The desk, the lamp, the present, all of it thinned out. And it was 2010 again, and it was a valley with no name worth saying, and no moon at all. They never saw my face, she thought, only heard the engines come back. That was enough. That was the deal. A recon team had been pinned in that valley. 8 men in a fold of rock with the weather down to the deck and the ceiling at 600 feet, and the enemy close enough to throw stones. No moon. No gun line that could reach them. Just 2 voices on a radio and 1 airplane that could get under the cloud. And the airplane was hers. Captain Renata Voss, 32 years old, and her backseater, Captain Dominic Sayers. Ripsaw, because he laughed like a torn sheet and never stopped talking on the ground and went perfectly, beautifully silent the moment the wheels came up. They went under the weather at 600 feet in the dark in the mountains, which is a thing you were taught your whole career never to do. And they did it because the alternative was 8 families getting a flag. She remembered the exact numbers, because numbers were what she had instead of the things she didn't let herself feel. Ceiling 600 feet. Visibility 1.5 miles in blowing snow. 8 men on the ground, and 1/10 of their ammunition left. 240 knots in a valley with walls she couldn't see, flying by instruments and by Sayers's voice, and by a faith she had no business having. Run after run. Low enough to read the muzzle flashes. Sayers calling the targets in that flat radio voice, steady as a metronome, while the valley walls strobed and the radar altimeter screamed at her in a voice she'd long since learned to file under noise. He talked her eyes onto each target, left 10 degrees, base of the draw, 2 of them, cleared hot, and she put the ordnance exactly where his voice said to put it, and the team lead came up on the radio after every pass with the same broken gratitude. They took the team out of the fire 1 pass at a time. 40 minutes that felt like a single held breath. And on the 5th pass, something came up out of the dark and hit them. A hard jolt through the airframe, a sound like a sledge on a car door, warning lights blooming across the panel like a city seen from space, and the controls going heavy and wrong in her hands. She'd asked Sayers for the bingo numbers. He hadn't answered. She'd said his name on the intercom, once, twice, no voice. She'd brought the jet home alone. Battle-damaged, 1 good hydraulic system, a backseater who wasn't talking, 400 miles of black mountains, and a recon team behind her that was already walking out alive because of the runs they'd made before the hit. She'd climbed up through the weather into a sky full of stars she could finally see, and she'd flown the long way home with the autopilot off because the airplane wouldn't hold it anymore. And she'd talked to Dominic the whole way, even though he never answered, because the alternative was silence, and she could not have the silence yet. She told him the fuel state. She told him the heading. She told him they did good work back there. She told him to hang on. She put the airplane on the deck at a divert field, with her hands steady and her face wet, and the team lead's voice still in her headset saying, "Thank you, whoever you are, thank you." The crash crews were already rolling. She set the brakes, and she finally let herself turn around in the seat. And she knew before she turned, the way you always know. They gave her the Navy Cross for that night. She would have traded it in a heartbeat, and everyone who knew her knew it. The call sign came from the men on the ground. They'd never seen her. They only ever heard the engines come back out of the dark, again and again, when nothing else could reach them. So they called her the thing that comes in the dark and brings you home. NIGHTHAWK. It stuck the way true things stick. She closed the program. Tomorrow she would lead the missing man pull-up for Dominic Sayers in 704. The airframe his old squadron still flew, and then she would let him go. Somewhere out on the dark line, a staff sergeant was sleeping, certain he had won. She thought about Kern for exactly as long as it took to feel almost sorry for him, which was not very long. He was small against this. He was a man who had no idea he had stepped into the middle of a debt 16 years deep. She had carried Dominic home once. Tomorrow she would carry his name across the field, and then she would set it down. The light went out. On the desk, the folded program, and one glove, ready for a sunrise she had owed someone for a very long time. Thursday came up gray and cold and beautiful, the way the best flying mornings do. By 0500 the flight line was awake, air crew gathering for the brief, breath showing in the floodlights, the four-ship building on the ramp with 704 prepped as lead. The missing man. The whole station knew what the morning was for, even most of the ones who didn't know who was flying it. The woman came out in full flight gear, torso harness, helmet bag, the worn glove from the desk on her left hand, and walked towards 704 with her feet eating the painted line, heel to toe, exactly. Staff Sergeant Travis Kern stepped into her path. He'd been waiting for this. Badgeless on his line, walking toward his lead jet. In his mind, she was a trespasser, caught in the act, and he had an audience of aircrew, and he was going to end the clipboard once and for all in front of all of them. "You don't touch that aircraft." He squared up, chest out, voice pitched to Carrie. "You're not badged, you're not authorized. You are trespassing on a controlled flight line during flight ops, and I am done being nice about it. Devlin." He didn't take his eyes off her. "Get this civilian off my flight line, now." She stopped. She looked at him, calm, the helmet bag hanging easy off her shoulder. "Staff Sergeant," she said, "step out of the way." "Or what?" He put his hand on her, flat on her shoulder, then a shove, hard, meant to move her back from the jet, meant to be seen moving her. "Or what, clipboard?" She gave to the shove and didn't fall. Her feet set under her the way a fighter's feet set, weight low, balance perfect, and her hand did not come up. She could have put him on the concrete in under a second, and everyone who actually knew her would later swear to it. She didn't. She let him do it. She let him lay his hands on a Navy Cross recipient in front of 50 witnesses, because the only thing better than a warning is a man building the case against himself, brick by brick, in public. There is a discipline to not fighting back that is harder than fighting. It is the discipline of a person who has nothing left to prove to anyone, who knows exactly what her hands can do, and has therefore stopped needing to show it. Kieran read her stillness as fear or as weakness, the way his kind always did. The aircrew watching read it correctly, which was as the calm of someone who had already won and was simply waiting for the clock to finish running. The helmet bag did not slip off her shoulder. Her breathing did not change. She looked at the hand on her, and then she looked at the man it belonged to, and she let the morning come. "Devlin," Kern barked again. "I gave you an order." And Lance Corporal Sam Devlin, 19 years old, 4 months on the line, took one step back instead of forward. "Staff Sergeant," he said, and his voice shook and held. I'm not putting hands on her. That's not a lawful, I'm not doing that." Kern rounded on him, face going red, and that was the moment the woman chose to do the only aggressive thing she had done in 3 days. She smiled. She looked at Travis Kern, and she smiled at him, small and almost kind, the first expression she had shown him since the dusk 3 nights ago. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." Kern read it as surrender. 20 feet away, Master Sergeant Gideon Pope, already moving, stopped walking, because he knew exactly what that smile was. And it was not surrender. It was the sound of a trap, finishing its long, slow swing toward shut. The flight line loudspeaker cracked open. The tower controller's voice came across the net, flat and clear and enormous in the cold morning air, rolling down 1,300 feet of concrete and bouncing off the hangar faces. "NIGHTHAWK Tower, you're cleared to the line. Aircraft 704 is yours. Winds calm, you're cleared as fragged for the flyover. Welcome back, ma'am." The flight line went absolutely silent. Not quiet. Silent. The power carts seemed to hold their breath. 50 aircrew and ground crew stood frozen on the ramp, and every single pilot in earshot turned toward the woman in the worn flight suit, because every single pilot in earshot knew that call sign the way. You know, a hymn from childhood. Brigadier General Roman Tate stepped out of the gathering by the brief tent. The wing commander. He had flown in himself for this, and he walked across the concrete, and he came to attention 3 feet from the woman Kern had called clipboard, and he saluted her. "Colonel Voss," he said, and his voice carried because he meant it to. "It's an honor, ma'am. For the crews who don't know, this is Colonel Renata Voss. Call sign Nighthawk, Navy Cross. She's leading the missing man this morning for Captain Sayers, who flew behind her the night she earned that name." He held the salute. "The line is yours, Colonel." She returned it. One motion, clean, economical. The salute of a person who had rendered and received 10,000 of them and wasted motion on none. And the worn glove on her left hand made the gesture look like something carved. And then the flight line stood. The pilots first, the foreship, the spares, the duty aircrew, coming to attention in a ragged wave that smoothed as it spread, and then the ground crews, the maintainers, the fuel handlers. Pope among them already at rigid attention, with something bright in his old eyes. 50 people, then more, standing for the quiet woman who had let a staff sergeant shove her so the whole field could watch him do it. A young captain near the brief tent, a first-tour pilot who had grown up on the story the way other kids grew up on ball players, said the name under his breath like he couldn't quite believe the sky had handed it to him. "That's Nighthawk. That's actually her." The lieutenant beside him didn't answer. He'd already come to attention, and his throat had gone tight, and he was not going to be the one who made a sound. Because every aviator on that line knew the Valley story. They'd heard it in ready rooms, and at bars, and in the dark before their own bad nights. The woman who took a damaged jet under a 600-foot ceiling in the mountains, in the snow, with no moon, again and again, until 8 men lived, and brought her airplane and her fallen backseater home 400 miles alone. They knew it the way a profession knows its own scripture. And here she was, in a worn flight suit with no name tape, and a staff sergeant had spent 3 days calling her clipboard. And Travis Kern's face went through the whole journey. Confusion first, the name not landing, the words not fitting the clipboard in his head. Then disbelief, a small disbelieving shake of the head. No, No, that's the contractor. That's the... Then, recognition. The cold drop of it. The loudspeaker still echoing NIGHTHAWK off the hangar walls, and his own hand still warm from where he'd shoved her. Then horror, pure and total, as Staff Sergeant Travis Kern understood that he had put his hands on a colonel, a Navy Cross recipient, a legend with a call sign these pilots said like a prayer in front of his wing commander on a flight line full of witnesses. His hand was still half raised toward her. Slowly, he lowered it. "Colonel," Tate said, not loudly, not unkindly. "You're a colonel. You're a Navy Cross recipient, and this Marine just laid hands on you in front of 50 witnesses." He let that sit one beat. "And Staff Sergeant, that is the smallest of your problems this morning." Security stepped up on either side of Kern. He didn't resist. There wasn't anything left in him to resist with. He looked at the woman he'd named, looking for something, an explanation, a mercy, a word. She gave him nothing. She wasn't even looking at him anymore. She was looking at the jet. Colonel Renata Voss walked past Travis Kern as if he were a chalk left out on the ramp, set her hand on the boarding ladder of 704 and climbed, while behind her, the entire flight line held its attention and the cold morning held its breath. It came apart for Kern fast, the way these things do once the first stone goes. By the time Voss was strapping in, Master Sergeant Gideon Pope was at the general's elbow with a folder, and the folder was the end of Travis Kern. The night turnaround inspections signed and never walked, the faked FOD checks, the fluid samples logged that nobody had pulled, the camera logs and the duty roster that proved a jet had gone back on the schedule certified safe by a man who hadn't been within 100 feet of it. "He didn't just bully Marines, sir," Pope said quietly. "He signed inspections he never walked. He put aircraft back in the air green that nobody had checked. He gambled their lives to keep his numbers clean." He set his jaw. "And there's a pattern in the late logs. Hazing. Kids made to stand the line past midnight on invented gripes. One of them pressured into initialing a record he never completed." The pressured Marine told the truth that morning, once it was clear that the truth was finally safe. He was a lance corporal who'd lain awake for weeks over a log he'd initialed under a staff sergeant's glare, certain that telling anyone would end him. And now he stood in the cold and said it all in a rush, and the relief of it left him shaking. Devlin gave his statement plainly. The late nights, the invented infractions, the order he'd refused on the ramp, and Kern's own fabricated report, the unauthorized civilian complaint he'd filed against a colonel under her cover name, turned in his hand and became the thread they hanged the whole thing on. A false official statement, signed and dated. The assault 50 people had watched, the safety records that could have killed a pilot. Each one alone was the end of a career. Together, they were the kind of morning a man does not come back from, and every bit of it had been built by Kern's own hand, in writing, while a Navy Cross recipient stood at a fence and let him. There would be an investigation, a real one, the kind with a colonel from outside the wing and a stack of sworn statements, and a JAG officer who didn't care whose numbers had looked good. But the shape of it was already clear on the ramp that morning. The faked safety records were not a personnel matter. They were the kind of thing that ended careers, and, left alone a few months longer, would have ended a life. He was relieved on the spot and taken into custody pending charges. Not because anyone wanted a spectacle, because a man who fakes the inspection that keeps a jet from falling out of the sky has earned every formal thing that comes for him. The Marines who had laughed at his jokes about clipboard found, suddenly, that they had urgent business elsewhere on the line, and could not meet his eyes as he was walked off it, off the painted concrete he had called his kingdom, heel to toe, the long way, past the jets. Lance Corporal Sam Devlin stood off to the side, not sure if he was in trouble for refusing the order, until Pope walked over to him. "You refused an unlawful order in front of your whole line," Pope said. "And you told the truth when it cost you something to tell it." He looked the kid up and down. "You're coming off Kern's roster. You're working for me now. We're going to make a plane captain out of you. A real one. The kind whose signature means a jet is safe because he walked it. Understood?" "Aye, Master Sergeant," Devlin said, and his voice cracked, and nobody held it against him. He'd refused an order from the only authority he'd known on that line, with his career 4 months old and shaking in his hands, because a quiet woman had once told him not to let a loud man make him forget what he knew. He hadn't forgotten. That, in the end, was the whole of it. If you've stayed this far, if you came for the moment the line chief learned her name and the whole flight line stood, then do the one thing that keeps these stories coming. Subscribe to Honor Tales. There's a sunrise left in this one, and it's the part that matters most. The engines of 704 spun up with a rising shriek that rolled across the field, and the 4-ship taxied into the gray dawn, and the station went quiet to watch. They came back over the field at sunrise in tight formation, 4 jets, low and clean, the light just breaking gold over the eastern hangars. And at the section, on a count only the flight knew, the number 2 aircraft, 704. Voss, in the lead position of the slot they'd built around her, pulled straight up and away, vertical, climbing alone into the brightening sky. The missing man, the gap in the formation where a pilot should be, where Captain Dominic Sayers should be, the oldest and most honest thing aviators do for their dead. The field stood silent and watched the gap in the sky where he wasn't. When she'd landed and shut down and climbed out, Colonel Renata Voss walked to the squadron board where the morning's flight had been written up, and she stood a moment in front of the name. Captain Dominic Sayers. Ripsaw. She took the worn glove off her left hand and held it, and she said something too quiet for anyone to hear. "Okay," she said, to the name, to the morning, to 16 years. "I've got it from here." Her secure phone vibrated against her hip. She looked at it. A message from a string of characters that had no business existing, from a call sign she had been told, with certainty, was gone. A name carved on a different wall in a different place. 5 words and a letter. Heard the harbor lights still burning. Come see it. See Cobalt, a harbor she knew. A port on the far edge of a sea half a world away, where the lights came up at dusk, like a string of small fires on the water, and where a man she'd grieved was apparently, impossibly, alive and waiting, and asking her to come. She did the arithmetic without meaning to. The harbor was 11 time zones east. The light he meant burned at the mouth of a channel she'd flown over once, in another life, on another bad night. If Cobalt was sending, Cobalt had survived something he was supposed to have died in, and was somewhere he was not supposed to be, and needed her to understand both of those things from 5 words and a single letter. She understood. That was the language they'd built years ago for exactly this. For the day one of them came back from a wall with their name already carved on it. Colonel Voss looked at the message for a long moment. Then she looked up at the sky, where the gap had been, now just blue, now just morning. She closed the phone. She put the worn glove in her pocket. And she walked toward the next thing, because that was the deal. That had always been the deal. You carry them home, and then you go back out into the dark, and you bring back whoever's left. Behind her, the flight line was already moving again, tighter than it had been in years. A 19-year-old learning to walk an airplane the right way under an old man's eye. 704 sat cooling on the ramp where she'd left it, clean, checked, honest, ready for whoever flew it next. The way every jet on every line is supposed to be, and the way one man had decided they didn't need to be, until a woman he called Clipboard walked his line in the dark and proved him wrong. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.